The funeral director cleared his throat nervously, glancing between my brother Marcus and me as if he'd accidentally walked into a family argument. Mrs. Thompson, I apologize for bringing this up during such a difficult time, but there's the matter of the final payment. Marcus straightened his designer tie, the same arrogant gesture he'd been making since high school, and stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place as the golden child. Of course, Mr. Davidson. I'll handle the family expenses. What's the total? $75,463, Mr. Davidson replied, consulting his clipboard. That includes the mahogany casket, the granite headstone, the church service, the reception venue, the floral arrangements, and the burial plot in the premium section that Mr. Thompson specifically requested. I watched Marcus's face carefully as he processed the number. His confident smile faltered slightly. 75,000 was more than he'd expected, but he couldn't back down now, not in front of the 112 people who had come to pay their respects to our father. That's fine, Marcus stammered, reaching for his wallet. I have the family credit card and… Actually, I interrupted quietly, it's already been taken care of. Every head in the immediate vicinity turned toward me. My mother Patricia, my sister-in-law Jennifer, my uncle Robert, and my Aunt Diane all stared at me with identical expressions of confusion. What do you mean? Marcus demanded, his voice carrying that edge of irritation he used whenever I contradicted him about anything. I mean, I paid for Dad's funeral 6 days ago, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. The full amount, plus a tip for the staff who worked overtime to accommodate our timeline. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone's high heels clicking on the marble floor of the funeral home lobby. Marcus stood frozen, his wallet halfway out of his jacket pocket, looking like someone had just told him the laws of physics had been suspended. You paid? My mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella, where would you get $75,000? The question hit me exactly the way she'd intended it to, with the underlying assumption that I couldn't possibly have that kind of money. For the past 8 years, my family had watched me work as a freelance translator, living in a modest apartment and driving a 5-year-old Toyota, and concluded that I was the family disappointment who would never amount to anything significant. What they didn't know was that I had been building a translation and localization empire that now served Fortune 500 companies across 4 continents. While they worried about my unstable career choice, I had been quietly becoming one of the most successful language services entrepreneurs in the industry. I have savings, I said simply, which was technically true. The $43 million in my various business accounts could be considered savings, even if they represented years of strategic reinvestment and careful growth. Marcus finally found his voice again, though it came out higher than usual. Isabella, you can't afford this. You work part-time translating documents. Let me handle the family expenses like Dad would have wanted. There it was, the same condescending tone he'd been using since we were children, the same assumption that anything important should be handled by him because he was older, male, and had an MBA from Wharton. Never mind that his MBA had led to a middle management position at a mid-sized consulting firm where he made a decent but unremarkable salary. Dad would have wanted his funeral paid for, I replied. He wouldn't have cared who wrote the check. But this is a family responsibility, Jennifer chimed in, speaking for the first time since the conversation began. Marcus is the eldest son. It's his duty to handle these arrangements. I looked at Jennifer, my brother's wife of 6 years who had never worked a day in her life but somehow felt qualified to lecture me about responsibility. She was the same woman who had suggested I find a nice man to take care of me at last year's Christmas dinner because my career was too uncertain for long-term planning. Jennifer, I said calmly, duty isn't about who has the oldest Y chromosome. It's about who has the capability and willingness to do what needs to be done. Mr. Davidson shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could disappear into the wallpaper. Perhaps we should discuss the details privately. No, I interrupted, making a decision that had been building for 8 years. Let's discuss them right here. Marcus, you're upset that I paid for Dad's funeral because you think it makes you look bad. You're not concerned about my finances or what's appropriate. You're concerned about your image as the successful son who takes care of family obligations. Marcus's face flushed red, the same color it had turned in high school when anyone challenged his authority. That's not. Isabella, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that you assumed I couldn't afford it, so you didn't bother asking if I wanted to contribute. You just stepped forward to handle the family expenses because you've never considered the possibility that I might be more financially capable than you are. My phone chose that moment to ring. The caller ID showed Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management, my investment advisor calling about the quarterly portfolio review we had scheduled. I almost declined the call, but something about the looks on my family's faces made me reconsider. I should take this, I said, answering the phone. Hello, David. Isabella, I'm sorry to call during your father's service, but we have a time-sensitive opportunity. The tech company acquisition we discussed has accelerated their timeline. They're offering $450 million for your language technology patents and software platforms. Do you want to proceed? I could have sworn the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marcus's mouth actually fell open, and Jennifer grabbed his arm like she needed physical support. $450 million, I repeated, making sure everyone heard clearly. That's for the technology division only, correct? Not including the service contracts or the European subsidiary. Correct. The service contracts and European operations would remain under your control. This is purely for the AI-powered translation technology and the proprietary software you've developed. I glanced around at my family's stunned faces. Let me call you back in an hour, David. I'm at my father's funeral and I'd like to give this decision the attention it deserves. Of course. My condolences again on your loss. Your father would be proud of what you've built. After ending the call, I looked around at a circle of relatives who seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. $450 million? My Uncle Robert whispered. Dollars. For part of my business, yes. I slipped my phone back into my purse. The translation and localization company I started 8 years ago has grown somewhat beyond what you all expected. Somewhat. Marcus's voice cracked like a 13-year-old's. Isabella, what exactly do you do? It was a fair question, considering that none of them had ever bothered to ask for details about my work beyond polite inquiries about whether I was keeping busy with my little translation projects. I run GlobalSpeak Technologies, I explained. We provide translation and localization services for international corporations, governments, and NGOs. We also develop AI-powered language processing software and maintain the largest database of cultural context algorithms in the industry. Blank stares met this explanation, so I simplified it. When a company wants to expand into new countries, they hire us to translate their content, adapt their marketing for local cultures, and ensure their technology works in different languages. When governments need to communicate with international partners, they use our platforms. When the UN needs real-time translation for meetings, they use software I developed. How many employees? My Aunt Diane asked faintly. 1,200 across 17 countries. Though most of our work is done through proprietary software that I designed so we can handle massive projects with relatively lean teams. The number seemed to bounce off them like rubber balls. I could see them trying to reconcile this information with their mental image of me as the family member who had chosen an impractical career and needed guidance about financial planning. The $75,000 for Dad's funeral, I continued, represents about 45 minutes of revenue for my company. I could have paid for it with the interest my money earned while we were sitting here talking. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the funeral home's upholstered chairs, looking like he needed medical attention. This is impossible. We would have known. We would have seen signs. What signs were you looking for, Marcus? Designer clothes? A luxury car? A mansion in the suburbs? Well, yes. If you're that successful, why are you living like what? Like someone who cares more about building something meaningful than impressing people at dinner parties. The truth was more complex than I was letting on. For the first 3 years of building my company, I genuinely had been struggling financially, reinvesting every penny of profit back into development and growth. But even after the business became wildly successful, I had continued living modestly because I enjoyed my simple life and because I wanted to build something lasting rather than just accumulating luxury items. My mother finally found her voice. Isabella, if you have this kind of money, why didn't you help when Marcus and Jennifer were struggling with their mortgage last year? This was the question I'd been dreading because it cut to the heart of our family dynamics. Marcus and Jennifer had indeed struggled with their mortgage. A mortgage on a house that cost twice what they could afford, purchased to maintain an image of success that existed only in their own minds. Because you never asked me for help, I replied. Marcus specifically told me he had family finances under control and didn't need advice from someone with an unstable income. His exact words. Marcus winced, probably remembering that conversation as clearly as I did. He had been lecturing me about the importance of financial planning while Jennifer nodded along, both of them completely unaware that I was already worth more than they would earn in their entire lifetimes. Besides, I continued, Marcus didn't want my help. He wanted to prove he could handle everything himself because that's what successful men do. Accepting assistance from his little sister would have contradicted the narrative he'd built about our relative positions in the family hierarchy. Jennifer looked confused. What narrative? The one where Marcus is the responsible, successful child who takes care of family obligations, and I'm the impractical dreamer who needs guidance and protection from the harsh realities of the business world. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening the app that tracked my company's real-time financial metrics. The current quarterly revenue figure made my Aunt Diane make a small choking sound. $37 million in revenue this quarter, I announced. Net profit margins around 62% because most of our services are automated through software I developed. My personal net worth as of this morning was approximately $89 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning system humming in the background. 89 million, my mother repeated slowly, like she was testing the words in a foreign language. Give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations, I confirmed. The exact number changes daily based on stock prices and currency exchange rates. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back like a caged animal. This doesn't make sense. Isabella, if you're that wealthy, why do you live in that tiny apartment? Why do you drive that old car? Why do you shop at regular stores instead of what? Instead of spending money on things I don't need to impress people I don't like. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they carried 8 years of accumulated frustration. 8 years of family gatherings where my lifestyle was criticized and my choices questioned. 8 years of well-meaning relatives suggesting I needed to get serious about my future and find stability through marriage or a traditional corporate job. I live in my apartment because it's walking distance from my office and I enjoy the neighborhood. I drive my car because it's reliable and gets good gas mileage. I shop at regular stores because the clothes fit just as well whether they cost $50 or $500. My Uncle Robert, who had spent the past 3 family gatherings explaining why I should consider a career in real estate because it was more stable than freelancing, looked like he was solving calculus problems in his head. Isabella, he said carefully, when you said you do translation work. I said I run a translation and technology company. The difference is that everyone heard translation work and assumed I was a struggling freelancer working for small clients. Nobody asked about the scope, the revenue, the growth trajectory, or the international partnerships. This was the crux of the issue that had been building for years. My family had created a narrative about my life based on limited information and their own assumptions about what success looked like. They had never bothered to ask detailed questions about my work because they had already decided it wasn't substantial enough to warrant serious attention. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. The Fortune 500 client wants to move the Monday meeting to Tuesday. Also, the EU just approved our expansion into 3 new markets. Congratulations. I showed the text to the group. European Union approval for business expansion. We'll be operating in 20 countries by the end of next year. Jennifer sat down next to Marcus, her face pale. Isabella, I owe you an apology. Last Christmas when I said you should find a husband for financial security, you said I should stop playing career woman and focus on finding a man who could give me the life I deserved. The memory still stung because it had come during what should have been a celebration of my company's biggest contract signing. I was wrong. You were condescending, I corrected. There's a difference. Wrong implies you didn't have enough information. Condescending means you assumed I couldn't possibly be successful on my own. Mr. Davidson, who had been standing quietly by his desk during this entire exchange, cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should mention that Miss Thompson also covered the costs for the floral arrangements at all 3 churches, the catering for the reception, and a generous donation to the children's charity your father supported. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. How much did all of that cost? An additional $43,000, Mr. Davidson replied. Ms. Thompson felt it was important to honor your father's memory properly. 43,000, Marcus repeated numbly. So you spent over $100,000 on Dad's funeral? I spent what was necessary to give him the send-off he deserved, I replied. The same send-off you would have given him if you'd had the resources. This seemed to hit Marcus harder than the financial revelations. For a moment, his face showed something that might have been genuine remorse instead of just shock. Isabella, he said quietly, I called you a failure. You called me a failure at our father's funeral, I corrected. In front of people who came to pay their respects. You said Dad would be ashamed of what I'd become. I was wrong. You were cruel, I replied, echoing my earlier distinction. And you were cruel because you believed you had the right to judge my life without bothering to understand it. My mother stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with grief for my father. Isabella, can you ever forgive us? For what specifically? For not seeing what you'd accomplished. For treating you like you needed our guidance instead of recognizing that you were succeeding beyond anything we'd imagined. I considered her question carefully. The hurt ran deep, 8 years of feeling dismissed, underestimated, and patronized by people who should have been celebrating my achievements. But holding on to that hurt wouldn't honor my father's memory or improve our family's future. I can forgive you, I said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means acknowledging what went wrong and committing to doing better. Marcus found his voice again, though it came out subdued. What would doing better look like? It would look like treating me as an equal instead of a charity case. It would mean asking questions about my work instead of making assumptions. It would mean celebrating my successes instead of worrying about my failures. I paused, looking around at faces that suddenly seemed much younger and less certain than they had an hour ago. And it would mean recognizing that there are different ways to be successful. I didn't follow the traditional path of marriage, corporate climbing, and status symbols. That doesn't make my path wrong, it just makes it different. Over the next hour, as we finalized the details for Dad's burial and reception, the conversation gradually shifted. Instead of planning around Marcus's leadership and my presumed limitations, we talked as equals. My uncle asked thoughtful questions about international business. My mother wanted to understand how technology translation worked. Jennifer apologized again, this time with specifics about her previous comments and genuine remorse. At the graveside service, Marcus delivered a revised eulogy that focused on Dad's values of hard work and determination rather than family legacy and traditional success measures. When he talked about Dad's children, he mentioned my business achievements alongside his own career progression. During the reception, something unprecedented happened. Family members started asking me for advice. My cousin David wanted to discuss his startup idea. My Aunt Diane asked about international investment opportunities. Uncle Robert inquired about technology trends in real estate. For the first time in my adult life, I was being treated as the expert rather than the family member who needed guidance. As the day wound down and relatives began leaving, Marcus approached me privately. Isabella, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. I should have said that years ago. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Because it would have meant admitting that my assumptions about success were wrong. And because if you were more successful than me, it would change the way I saw myself. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Marcus, my success doesn't diminish yours. You've built a good life, a stable career, a loving family. Those things have value independent of how much money anyone makes. But you've built something extraordinary. I've built something that works for me, I corrected. Just like you've built something that works for you. The problem was never our different choices. It was the assumption that only one way of living could be valid. 6 months later, I established the Thompson Family Foundation in Dad's memory, focusing on educational opportunities for entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds. Marcus serves on the board of directors and Jennifer manages the scholarship application process. My family gatherings are different now. Instead of defending my choices or enduring lectures about financial planning, I participate in conversations about business strategy, investment opportunities, and industry trends. Instead of being the family member who needs guidance, I'm the one other relatives come to for advice. But the most significant change isn't in how they see me, it's in how I see myself. For 8 years, part of me had wondered if they were right, if my unconventional path was somehow less valuable than traditional measures of success. Dad's funeral forced me to stop hiding my achievements and own my success completely. Sometimes the most important moment isn't when others finally see your worth. It's when you stop waiting for their permission to claim it.